Hi everyone. Thank you for coming here tonight. I realize that it's vacation season and probably would like to spend some time somewhere else. I appreciate that you are here tonight. We have the second meeting of this meetup. And first of all, I want to thank our great sponsors, the Bank of Ireland Grand Canal, who is hosting us tonight. Let's give them a big round of applause. And the second sponsor which I want to mention today is Siteone.com, which is hosting my articles. So I owe them. And tonight we're going to have the following schedule. First, we'll have Ricardo, we've had him already, who will talk us about media queries and SAS. And after that, I will have a talk on the topic of web development in the age after Internet Explorer. So let's start and put Ricardo on screen. You're on, Ricardo.
Am I up?
Yes, you're on.
Okay, I'm gonna wave. What's up, everybody? Can't, there you go. Hey, okay. That feels good. Having you guys, seeing you guys there, and again, well, thanks for coming. I know it's vacation time over there, so I appreciate you coming over. Okay, so who likes dogs? Raise your hand. Okay, I have a very little screen here. Hold on. There we go. And who likes CSS? There you go. Nice. That's a big hand there on the screen. Alrighty. And who likes SAS? All right. Good. All right. So this is going to be a very high-level overview of how SAS is, in my view, making things, sometimes can make things more complicated than they need to be, when they really don't have to be. So let me go ahead and I'm going to start my presentation, and let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. All right. Are you guys seeing the bummed doggy guy? All right. What inspired me to make these slides and this talk is after working with SAS for a while now, I realized that handling media queries for responsive work is just sometimes becomes very, very complicated. And after working with different methodologies, I realized that just a simple 3-line mixin can make life so much easier and let me focus on what I want to do, create nice experience, great designs, and memorable experiences for the users and all that. So let me go ahead and get started here. First, I'm going to give you a short story of who I am, where I come from. I'm originally from Colombia, South America. I'm married and I have a beautiful wife and son, Heather, and his name is Ricardo, of course. I've been doing web design for a very long time. So I've been through a lot of the things that actually you're going to hear later later on. And that says there are no dumb questions. I just think it's dumb not to ask. So if you have any question, don't hesitate to stop me and just go ahead and ask. It's just dumb if you don't ask. All right. All right. So let's start with the simple things. What is a MediaQuery? Media queries are basically a CSS3 module that allows content rendering to adapt to screen or devices resolutions. That's basically the definition. Now, how does a media? It's basically what you see here. You have a media directive, then the min width, max width, whatever approach you want to use. Then you have your selector and then your declaration in there. Then how do you use media queries? Basically, you have your selector on the left, and then down your CSS, you create a media query with the same structure we just saw. Now, there are two ways of creating media queries. The first way is the vanilla CSS way, and the second way is the Sass way, or ways. There are different ways from a Sass standpoint. The vanilla CSS way is very simple, or pretty straightforward. We have a header with specific properties, and then down in our CSS we have our media query blocks, and we have min width or max width, either mobile first, desktop first. It doesn't even matter which approach you use. Best practices or industry says that you should do mobile first, but actually I just think that's not necessarily the case every time. If you do desktop first, you're okay. Anyway, then you have another breakpoint for 800 pixels, and then you have more stuff happening at that point to the header. So that's the vanilla CSS way. Now, one of the Sass ways is called the screen size based way, which basically you create, with Sass, you create variables depending on the device or on the screen size. In this case, we have phone, phone wide, tablet, and large screen. Then you have a mixing. I'm not going to get into the details of the mixing because I want you to learn the concepts of the whole talk. So, and then you have the mixins for mobile first, which uses min width, and desktop first, which uses max width. All right, everything relatively fine and dandy there. So I'm highlighting the devices here because we're going to see that things can get hairy and come real fast. So let's say you have a breakpoint between 320 and 500, and you need to create another variable with another particular name. Phone pseudo wide. You just come up with a name, any name you want. And then you have another breakpoint, which is tablet pseudo wide, because you have another breakpoint. Then you have another breakpoint, which is tablet semi-wide. And now you can start seeing how hairy things can get pretty fast. So you have, the boxes are misaligned there. So you have a bunch of funky names, as you can see in the bottom. The last one is MediaQuery's Mayhem, which is at 1140 pixels. And you can end up with so many breakpoints and so many names for those breakpoints that things get out of hand really fast. It gets even more complex and difficult for those that are picking up the project after we handed off or something. Somebody new comes into the team, so they have to learn all these stuff, and it's just too ugly. So the way you use that is that you're going to create a selector, and then you're going to include the mixing, which is, the mixing is called phone wide. Does anybody remember what the width for phone wide? I don't. So let's say we're going to use another breakpoint, and the breakpoint is going to be tablet. Do you remember what the width for tablet is? Right. And what about MediaQuery's Mayhem? Maybe I said it, so we remember we got that in our memories now. It's 1140. But then, what if you don't say it? So you can end up with so many MediaQuery names that is just absolute mayhem. So that's very hard to scale. Now let's see the pros of this approach. The first pro is certainly a clever solution. You have individual mixins for min width and max width. You have independent mixins for the screen size list. It's easy to scale because as long as you add another variable name with a specific breakpoint, you can scale that up. And is easily adaptable to content-based breakpoints, which is what kind of the best practices are, and not device-dependent or screen-based breakpoints is. Now the cons is certainly too verbose if you're not careful when naming your breakpoints. Then you're prone to excess in breakpoints. The abstraction of the name and the width makes it hard to memorize the names. So that's that style. There's another way of handling media queries with SAS called the named media queries. This is a mixin that I actually used that Chris Coyer, if I remember right, he was with you guys last time. He created this mixin, so I started using it for a while there. So what it basically is that it assigns again a variable name to a specific width. So in this case, PapaBear is 1600 pixels, MamaBear is 1250, and BabyBear is 650. So you need to add a particular breakpoint, you need to come up with another name. And I just said PapaBear chair, the story. Then what happens if you need then yet another one? I came up with MamaBear chair for 1180 width. Then what happens if you have another one? Then we have BabyBear chair name. And then what happens if you have another one? Let's say you have Goldilocks for the 420 pixels. So again, we're running into the same issue where the breakpoints you're creating and the names you're creating for those breakpoints are just getting out of hand. Are you guys following me so far?
Yeah. Yes, we do.
Okay, cool. Again, if you have any questions, just let me know. Then, of course, at the end, we have MediaQuery's Mayhem for the 320 breakpoint. Now, with MediaQueries, you can use any name you want. If you're into Starbucks, which is a coffee shop here in the US, you go with the names of the sizes of their cups, with a short, tall, grande, and venti. But if you're a fan of Game of Thrones, then you can use the names from Game of Thrones, and that's totally fine. And if you're a fan of Lord of the Rings, then you can use that too. Or if you're a heavy metal fan, you just straight up say it the way it needs to be said. Which is my preferred one, if you ask me. Okay, so you get your selector. You include the mixin, which is include breakpoint, and then you do BabyBear. Does anybody remember what the width for BabyBear is?
640.
Yeah, I don't for BabyBear is okay. Let's say we include another breakpoint. Let's say we include MamaBear chair. Does anybody remember what the MamaBear chair width is?
1180.
I don't think. Okay, good. Then what happens when you're in somebody else's team, or you have a lot of web designers in the team? Not everyone is going to remember. What does anybody remember? Yeah, it's just very difficult. I honestly have no clue what those widths are. So again, now the concept is good. Now let's try to build upon it, and let's see how we can make it a little more friendly. So on the left side, we have the basic style created by Chris, and then I took it and did a little bit of tweaking. And the first thing is I changed the breakpoint name to max width, and that is going to allow me to know that I'm going desktop first. Then I use the same width in pixels as the name of the breakpoint. That way, before we get to that, then if we're going to transform that into mobile first, then what I can do, then all I need to do is change the max width to min width. I just use the min W for abbreviation reasons. And I'm going to swap the order. It's going to go from smaller to larger. And now things are starting to make a little more sense. Because when I use it, all I need to, when I include it, so I use the include directive and I do min width, that means I know I'm going this mobile first, and then I'm using 980. Does anybody remember what 980 width is? Right, there we go. So what about, yeah, so be happier. What about if we're going to do a breakpoint at 1024? So the variable name I'm using is exactly the same width I'm targeting. So 1024 is going to be 1024. Now that makes me a little happier even. And I'm so happy right now that I know that if I use 1140 as my name, I know that I'm targeting 1140 pixels. And I'm as happy as I can be because everything starts making more sense. So what are the pros of the NamedMediaQuery style? It's certainly a clever solution. You get individual mixins. All breakpoints are visible in a single media block. It's easy to scale. Easily adaptable to content-based breakpoints. And the cons are, again, too verbose if not careful when naming those breakpoints, unless you change the name into the actual width that you're targeting. It's prone to excess in breakpoints, and the abstract can make it hard to memorize the names versus the widths, and prone to too many lines in the mixing, so you end up with a pretty hefty file in terms of lines. And it's certainly not dry, you're repeating yourself over and over. To admit it, I've used the NamedMediaQuery's method before, and what you see here is a real SAS partial for my breakpoints. So as you can see, I have the mobile first here, desktop first on the top, and I went with my. So when I do 321, I know that I'm doing 321 pixels, which is. It turns into 20.06 EM, and all these values are in EMs because for good measure. It's recommended to use relative units for your media queries. You're not required to do it, but it's just a good measure. Anyway, the thing is that this is a pretty long file. I have a new breakpoint. I have to come here and add it to the mobile first and desktop first mixings. And that is just pretty ugly if you ask me. It's, of course, absolute SAS mayhem. Now, the screen size based. Now, this is an example. I'm not even going to get close to explaining what this is. But this is a mixing that you can use to create media queries. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but this isn't script. This mixing is actually this long. And that's just to handle, so to me, that's just mayhem. So I needed a way, I always looked out for a way to improve on. Until that, let's look at the pros of this huge mixing we saw. It's certainly clever, it's pretty robust. It's a single mixing that handles everything. It's easy to scale, and easily adaptable to content-based breakpoints, but the cons are pretty heavy. First, the usage is a bit confusing because you have these operators of more than, less than, equals, and then you have a device. It's too advanced for beginners, prone to excess in breakpoints. The abstraction, again, makes it hard to memorize your names, your widths. It has an excessive amount of lines in the mixing, and it's overkill mixing just to simply handle media queries. And that's just, that frustrates because, I mean, it's really powerful, but I don't think we need to get into such complexity just to handle media queries. Now, let's take a step back and think. Any method we use, all we need to accomplish is this. I don't care if you do it with CSS or with any of the easy or more complex ways in SAS. But this is what we're looking to end up with. Something simple. Now, let's put things in perspective and ask ourselves. Is SAS really overcomplicating things too much? Why do these mixins have to have so many cons? Does handling CSS media queries really has to be this complicated? Shouldn't be building a web in an easier way? And these complex and abstract features of SAS, aren't they taking us away from what matters the most, which is building memorable experiences and making our users happy? Now, ironically, SAS can answer all these questions with what I call the hasta luego mixing, which is basically in Spanish for so long, because you're going to be saying so long to those other mixins we just saw, and this is how the hasta luego mixing looks like. It's just a mere 3-line mixin that looks like this. And this is all you need to handle your media queries. At least this is how I've done it since I found out about it. You got your mixing. Going large means that you're going to a larger screen. So this is a mobile first mixing. Then you have here, and then your variables in here. This is all you need, really. And this is how. So you have your selector, then you have your mobile there, and then since you're going there mobile first, then your 600 pixel breakpoint, whatever that breakpoint was going to be, then you're going to add your desktop stuff there, and done. That's all you need. Really simple, really fast, very clear. So here it is again, a little bit more expanded example. So we have the mixing here. This is going to be mobile first. Then this is our example. We have the header. In small screens, it's going to be wide one. But at 487 pixels, it's going to turn into 50%. And that's all we need to know. That's all we need to do. That compiles to this. Header with 100. And at 487 pixels, it turns 50%. Now that makes much more sense than everything else. Let's see the pros. The pros: baffling, simple, and clear solution. Completely dry because you don't repeat yourself over and over. Individual mixings for desktop first and mobile first. It accomplishes exactly the same thing as any of the other methods with way less code. No need to keep track of widths. No need to memorize abstract names or widths. It directs you, makes you create breakpoints based on content rather than on specific device widths. And it's incredibly easy to use, easy for beginners to understand. As far as the cons, I have nothing. I don't see any single negative issue or anything negative with this mixing. At least I haven't experienced it, and I've used it for a long time. As far as desktop first, it's the same thing. The only thing here is that it changes from going large to going small. And we changed the min width to max width. So in this case, the header is going to be width 50%, and then at 725 pixels, it's going to go, because we're going small, it's going to turn into width 100, and this is exactly what we have here when it compiles. Header with 50% on desktop, and on smaller screens, starting at 725, is going to turn 100%. Now that is sweet, if you ask me. Now the takeaways are, put things in perspective after committing to a solution. When I started using these other mixins, I always question, is there a better way? Is there a faster way? So question your own methods as you go along. Never stop questioning your solutions you adopt, which is basically what I've asked myself all these months before I found the mixin we're talking about. Think about pros and cons to your methods. The power of SAS can be overwhelming. We saw that last mixing, but don't let it intimidate you. There are things out there in the SAS world that are absolutely fantastic, but if I don't know it, I just don't let it intimidate me. And it doesn't matter how proficient you are with a web technology, it's how you use it to make memorable experiences and our users happy. And I love this quote from Martin Luther King Jr. about what's life's most persistent, urgent question is, what are you doing for others? Which is ultimately what we want, no matter what technology we use. And that's it. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions? Thank you.
Let's give another try to microphones. Something else. Now bring this microphone as close as possible to you. Or you can come this way. Okay, straight.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
What's up, man?
Cool. I was going to ask, so the main difference I see between the first couple of mixins you showed us and your own one at the end was in the first one we're passing a variable name to the mixin, and in your one we're just passing the wish directly. And you cite that as an advantage because you don't need to keep track of matching the names to the widths. But you do probably still need to keep track of your widths. If, for example, your header changes its wish at 600 pixels, probably a couple of other display elements are changing at 600 pixels as well. So aren't you just going to be copying and pasting the value 600 pixels throughout your code instead of passing in a single variable name that you could change once?
You know what? That's a good question. I haven't experienced that. When I declare something, let's stick with the 600 pixels. I'm pretty aware what is happening along that breakpoint in the different elements on whatever it is that I'm working on. The great advantage that I've experienced with the simple mixing, with the hasta luego mixing, is that I don't have to not dealing with the variable names is made my life so much easier, because all I need to worry about is the specific breakpoint at which I need to take care of the layout at that specific point. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's certainly the fact that I don't have to mentally try to remember what Goldilocks width is or anything like that.
But then you do have to remember, So at some point, your site changes from whatever its tablet view is to its mobile view, and maybe 10 elements change all at once. So you don't have to remember the name of the variable, instead you have to remember the pixel value at which that point changes. So it's really, to a certain extent, it's just transferring the thing you have to remember.
Well, actually, I don't really have to remember everything, because when something breaks, I can see it and I just go and edit it at that point. It doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't...
It's not being an issue, is what you're saying.
It's not an issue, really. No, not at all.
Okay, thanks.
It just makes it really, really easy. Yeah, no problem. Thanks for asking, man.
Cool, cheers.
Okay, anyone else? Well, thank you, Ricardo. Muchas gracias. Thank you for...
De nada.
And we're going to close it here. Thanks again for your help, for your presentation. And hopefully we'll see you again some other time.
Sounds good, man. I'll send you a link so you can share with the group and all of that. Thanks again for coming, everybody.
Thank you.
See ya.
Okay, that was part one. We might, if you want, we can do a small break, or we can wrap it up faster and leave earlier. Wrap it up faster, huh? So I think, while it's still sun outside and nice. So we're going to move then to my presentation for tonight. And the topic is front-end development after Internet Explorer. It's actually a talk which is based on 2 articles which I published on SitePoint. There are the links there. Big credits to Natalia from SitePoint for this very nice illustration, which I borrowed to use as a cover here. And the context is, at the beginning of this year in January, Microsoft officially put the end to the support for all Internet Explorer versions below 11. So 10, 9, 8, none of them are supported anymore. Practically, they've pulled the plug on these browsers, and they're saying if you're still using them, use them on your own. It's not our fault if you get hacked or something else happens. Which for web developers is great news, because these old Internet Explorer versions are notoriously, as you go back in time, are notoriously bad and non-standard compliant and causing lots and lots of problems for developers. Some of you might remember this pie chart called Time Breakdown of Modern Web Design, in which the biggest slice, the yellow-orange one, is dedicated to trying to fix your website working in Internet Explorer. So things actually started with what is now called the browser wars, when initially Internet Explorer pulverized Netscape and the other competition, remained ruling unchallenged until Firefox came, then Chrome, then Opera, then the multitude of other web browsers based on WebKit or other things. So everybody who developed for Internet Explorer definitely laughed on something like that and shared among their colleagues some like these pictures to try and ease the pain of dealing with the problems that the Internet Explorer was bringing. Like the only good thing is for Internet Explorer is that it allows you to download Chrome or Firefox. Which brings us to the end of times for this ancient piece of software. Now, there is a very big debate, and it's not really the topic of this presentation, is should we drop support, yes or not? The answer to this question. I think it depends on each situation. If you have enough users that still use it, if you're going with the legacy software that is still in use, everything depends. There is no saying drop it because everybody drops it. You might have to keep it. In that case, you have my, I feel really sorry, and you have my sympathies that you still have to deal with something like that. Let's assume that everything is nice and fun, and say, we drop support. Yes. Hasta la vista, Internet Explorer. There are a bunch of things which we can lose to make our lives easier. We can get away with the browser hacks in the CSS. We can get rid of conditional comments. We can slim down on JavaScript libraries, remove proprietary CSS values, get rid of absolute meta tags, clean up the custom font declarations, and most importantly, simplify the cross-browser testing. We're going to run pretty fast through all of these elements, see exactly what's about, and then we can talk about things that you can now adopt without fear that you won't have support. If we're talking about browser hacks, there's a very nice website called browserhacks.com, which has a very, very good documentation for all sorts of browser hacks, be them selectors, property value, even JavaScript hacks, and it's not only limited to Internet Explorer. There are several hacks for different versions of Firefox. There are hacks for Chrome, depending on the version. We just, usually because the topic is getting rid of Internet Explorer, there will be many hacks, like we see there, property value hacks, like the star selector, which is a bit older for Internet Explorer 6. There was a time when the only option to have your website work on these old browsers was to use this sort of hacks. If you're still using that website is still live, you can clean up a lot of code and make it slimmer. Conditional comments came as the recommended modality to and that's alternative to hacks because it allowed you to load content, be them style sheets or even scripts, depending on a specific version of Internet Explorer. And we see at the beginning there are options to load different style sheets. There are options which is taken from the Bootstrap 3 template. And it's loading the HTML5 shiv, which practically tells all the browsers how to deal with the new HTML5 elements. Or we can, there was another options like adding extra classes to the HTML tag and use these classes to build more specific selectors so that you can go and fix the display. In terms of JavaScript libraries that can go away, most of all we're talking about the polyfills, which are those libraries which trick your browser to behave like a more modern one, and many of those things can be put away, and we can touch a little bit on that in the second part. But you can also use smaller libraries from other ones which are pretty much common, like jQuery. There is the 1x branch, which still keeps compatibility with the old Internet Explorer, and was the 2.x branch, which gave that away, meaning that all that code is not present anymore. We have a smaller library, a smaller resource that needs to be loaded, meaning that your performance might go a little bit up. Now jQuery is planning to actually ditch everything together and go to version 3, which means that it's they won't really care absolutely at all about the old browsers anymore in the new development. There are other qualities like the selectivizer, which makes all Internet Explorer browser able to interpret some of the new CSS3 selectors, or you can cut down on the test that you do with the modernizer. You know that you don't really have to worry about PNG transparency or some other values. So instead of having the page run that test at the loading time, you can take that test off and the page will load a little bit faster. Proprietary CSS values refer mostly to ActiveX displays and commands, which was before CSS3, and it was like the only way to actually bring a bit more fancy stuff, gradients, effects, transitions. That's what ActiveX was doing, and there was a time at the beginning when Internet Explorer was absolute king, when you could see some pages doing transitions from one page to the other and everything else. These things now can be put away because more or less Internet Explorer 11 and 8 know enough CSS3 that you won't need ActiveX anymore. Let it go the way the Flash went. Meta tags, this is some way of a touchy subject, meaning that depending on situation, some people say it's worth putting away, some people say it's still necessary to keep compatibility. And this is related to the fact that to keep backwards compatibility, Internet Explorer was built in such a way that it could display pages like older versions. And one way to say that I want this page to display like X version was this meta tag. If we did the testing and everything's okay, that's one less thing to learn. Custom fonts. The most important progress that's being done here is that new Internet Explorer 11 and 8 know modern web font formats. Meaning that you don't, when you go and build up your font, if you're not doing it from Google Fonts or something else, and you're building it yourself, you don't have to build the EOT, SVG, which is for old iOS. You can put that away as well. That's a huge format, I can tell you from experience. And nowadays, you deal with this if you're doing your own custom icon font, for example. Instead of using Font Awesome, you have your own icons and you're building it, so you can get away with only building TrueType and WOF format, or if you want to go all the way, build WOF2. The support we have below, it means that actually the new format works for everything from Internet Explorer 9 and higher. So with 9 and 10 away, we can safely go like this. And the credit for this research goes to Chris Square from CSS Tricks. That's from his article here. We come to the last topic of simplifying cross-browser testing. I wonder everyone had to deal with multiple IEs or IE tester. See those two images in the side, which at one point was the only way to load different versions of Internet Explorer on the same website. It crashed a lot. It didn't really work. Then the guys at Microsoft say, okay, we had enough of you complaining, we'll give you virtual machines. Preloaded with native Internet Explorer so you can go testing. Now you can get rid of these machines. You can only keep one or two as needed, but no need to load all the other ones. That's about what it's means to things that we can safely get rid of. Let's talk about what we can put in place of them. And basically, we're talking about things that didn't have enough support, that required polyfills or some other gimmicks to have them working. And now they have support full, at least 90% in all the mainstream browsers. And I have two main categories here. One is the CSS, and the second one would be the HTML. And in terms of CSS, we can now start working with things like Flexbox, which is a great alternative for building layouts to the float model. We have a Foundation 5, if I'm not mistaken, which already has implemented a Flexbox alternative to the grid system. Bootstrap 4 Alpha has an alternative that that allows you to switch between floats and Flexbox for the grid. And practically, it's a great alternative to many things that were built cumbersome with floats and the existing system. We can use freely things like CSS gradients. No more background images, no more sliced 1 pixel images or sprites to build fancy buttons or bars. You can do that very easy now with the gradients. Same thing with the CSS animations, transitions and transformation, which we've seen it today, all things moving all the way to the page, and it's not done with JavaScript. Many of this movement is done with CSS. And the advantage is that most of these effects get offloaded from the CPU to the video card, to the GPU, meaning that there's a little bit more processing power available for all the other JavaScript tools pushing down the throat of your browser. We can use now things like SVG filters, which is essentially Photoshop in a browser. You can do all sorts of effects with the SVG filters, blendings, masking, practically whatever you can do in terms of image editing with Photoshop. You can almost everything you can do with SVG filters. That's a huge area where we can talk and go into details, and we might have a discussion at a later time on this topic. We can now again use multi-column layout, which is like you see in a newspaper. Instead of having one huge block of text, you have 2 or 3 columns, depending on how you build it. And together with what Ricardo mentioned, the MediaQueries, you can make your text easier to read depending on the size of the screen is displayed on. And the last point would be pointer events, which most of them work in relation to SVG, but there is a simple combination when we can declare pointer events none, which is basically the equivalent of having that button disabled. Meaning, before now, you could, for example, put visibility none or opacity 0 on an element, but you could still click on it. It was still functional, even if visually it was not there. With the pointer events none, it's the same as you would make a handle in JavaScript and disable the events for that pointer. It allows you, for example, coupled with some other effects, for example, while you're transitioning or some other things, you're keeping that button disabled, and only when that transition or animation ends, that's when you're doing your switching is on. And you don't have to go to JavaScript to do that, to do it together in a CSS. Talking about HTML5, I think one of the most important things would be the full support for class list, which is native support for DOM navigation. If all you using jQuery before was to help you select the server elements so that you can do things with them, you can now do it with native JavaScript and class list and DOM token list, and it's a lot faster and it's more efficient than doing it with jQuery or with other library. We have support for everybody's doing social media today, so we're talking about iframe sandbox. All these buttons actually that you have the like button, the tweet this, share this, all these scripts create tiny iframes in the page where they bring in some of the scripts from their parent website. By declaring the iframe sandbox, you're actually limiting what these iframes can do to your page. So it's imposing a set of rules, and it's one extra layer of security against unwanted manipulation of your page. We have now full support for elements like the progress bar, the native HTML5. We had progress bars before, like Bootstrap, but it was done with divs. Same thing with the elements like range, again the slider. You don't really have right now to go for a library or a framework. Okay, you would want to go because the styling support for these elements is not is still not consistent. So if you wanted all your bars and sliders and everything else look very fancy in the way you want it, yes, you can still go to a library where you have control over how the display is. But if you just need the functionality, you can do it now native. In terms of validation, which is a big thing that HTML5 brought, validation on the client side without the use of JavaScript, or validation on the server side, which is still recommended to do. We have stuff like input type email, telephone, URL, which will validate the content automatically with so to see that what you put there is actually what is required. You can see up above there is the pattern attribute, which, for example, allows you to match, to validate the value of an input based on a regular expression. Let's take, for example, a telephone number. If you're knowing only, you're going to deal with only one country, then yes, the format, you can say it's standard. But even so, people might put spaces, might put dashes, or some might add the country prefix and anything like that. With a pattern attribute, you give the exact rule for that validation to happen. So when it's something ambiguous, or let's say a zip code or a postal code, even here in Ireland, we didn't really have normal postal codes until very recent. So how a field like it's used to validate United States zip code will validate something like Dublin 2. No way. So pattern again comes here. No attributes against that have full support would be the autofocus, which is self-explanatory. Data set and data attributes, which are already used a lot with JavaScript and various JavaScript frameworks to hold and pass data. And finally, we can end with the placeholder or spell check. Placeholder actually puts a text in that input. Usually it's used to give a hint. spell check is used to toggle the spell check or not. If you have a text area when you're writing an email, you will want the spell check on, but if you're using the same text area to pass code, for example, a piece of code, then seeing everything underlined with red, it's not really helpful. So you can disable the spell check for that with a simple attribute. And last but not least is the hidden attribute, which is effectively the equivalent of display none. Hides that element completely and takes it off the visual flow. You might find advantage using it. You might find that it might be easier to toggle the value of an attribute with JavaScript than to alter a class or the value of that property, CSS property with JavaScript. It's there. If you find a use for it, you can go on with it. There might be one last class of elements that we could talk about it in this topic, but I haven't really finished my research on that. It's actually what JavaScript elements that right now have full support. So I'm going to cut it short here and maybe have another talk on that at a later time, or pass the topic to somebody to another meetup who is dedicated more to JavaScript. So that was our visit into the life after Internet Explorer. Any questions? No? Okay. Thank you very much then for your attention. Another big thank you to our hosts who put up with us and offer us the refreshments and everything else. And maybe we'll see more of you at the next meeting in August, which will be again on the 2nd of August, so the first Tuesday. I'm going to do my best to find interesting topics, but yeah, I know it's again still vacation time, so those who can make it will be able to see the recording on the Meetup website, which I'll notify everyone as soon as I have it put on the mail and managed to finish it. If anyone wants some swap from SidePoint, feel free to help yourself. We don't have yet anything from WCSS, but maybe we'll find somebody who can help us bring it. Thank you again, and wish you all a very good evening.